So when we're talking about guardrails, this is one of the things that I wanted to come up here for, because I talk a lot about this with AI. In terms of guardrails, I personally think the guardrails have to be no more or no less than any other type of technology, right? That you have to essentially practice it with ethical standards of not just can you do this, but should you do this? And then once you're doing it, make sure that should something not work, depending on the extent and pervasiveness of the technology that you're using, you always need to make sure that the more pervasive it is, the stronger the ability is to cut off any sort of virus, for example, or malfeasance, right? So the more embedded, the more endemic any system is, whether it's technology or banking or something like that, right? The more embedded it is, the more potentially hazardous it is when something goes wrong, right? The more contained it is, the less risky. So, what we have to do essentially is say, okay, well, this is quite pervasive. Therefore, we need to make sure we have consistent monitors in every system that uses this particular type of technology. We have to make sure that those monitors are independent. We have to make sure that they are regularly checked. We have to make sure that if something goes wrong, that is confirmed by another secondary or tertiary source. If it is confirmed, an action is taken by an independent source that is able to cut off whatever it is that is potentially malicious, right? So those are the types of technology or systematic guardrails that I think, generally speaking, need to be embedded in any particular technology, and just have to be more embedded the more pervasive it is. The one issue that we really have with AI is we're now reaching this area of technology development where understanding that technology, the purpose of technology and progress, has been to replace human labor. It has always been to replace human labor. That is what it is. Like bulldozers replace people digging trenches, right? That is, the loom replaced a bunch of weavers doing things. That is what we've always been doing with technology. The wheel is basically so we don't need a bunch of people carrying individual small loads. We could have one thing carrying a large load instead of people. Everything is to replace human labor. So and there's nothing wrong with that. Fundamentally, that's a good thing, I think, right? Fundamentally, every time we replace human labor, we free up humans to do something that allows us to take more advantage of our particular advantages, which is like our brain, right? So we're able to then make more advancement in other area because we free up our brain space, right? So generally speaking, the benefit that we've had is that we've had a period of attrition that has lasted at least one generation. So people talk about, like, oh, well, cars came and buggy whip salesmen, had to go or whatever. And that's true, but it's not like all buggy whips disappeared the day a car was introduced, right? You had about a generation difference, which meant that all the buggy whip salesmen, they were like, okay, well, I'm not going to build my business more, and my kids should not go into this business. You got to go do something else. But there's enough business here for me to survive. Now, the problem that we've had, I think, has been that technology has been advancing at such a great rate that we no longer have these periods of attrition. Technology changes within the lifetime of a worker. So, like, and this has happened, for example, like with the coal mining and stuff like that, and the change in like car engines and things like that. Technology has changed so fast that people who are skilled in a particular technology, their knowledge has become obsolete in a half generation, which is 15 years. That is moving down towards 5 years, right? So what's happening now is that the lifespan of a career with the knowledge that you have when you're at your peak opportunity, right, is now about 10 years. And that is not useful because people live longer than that. And the resources that we are allocated in society are based entirely on the value of economic input we put into the economy, right? Somebody decides how much the work that we do is worth, and we're allocated resources accordingly. If you're a doctor, you get this much money, and then you can buy resources with that. If you're a lawyer, you get this. If you're a ditch digger, you get this, right? There's a societal weight on whatever your input is. The problem that we have is not technology. It's that we have an old economic model. It's that our model considers economic distribution only based on labor input. We have not been considering the fact that we've been reducing the amount of labor required in order to redistribute output, right? It doesn't make sense. Like more and more labor is not being required. So rewarding people for labor with resources doesn't make sense. We have more and more people who have no place in the economy because their labor simply isn't required to create the same amount of output. And what we're finding with AI, and we'll find even more with quantum computing as it goes online, that this is going to speed up exponentially. So what we really need to do, I think, is not worry so much about the technology, but focus more on a post-work world. Yay, we're going to have technology that's taking over all sorts of work. Okay, that's okay. Let's just accept that as something that would be okay. And then think, instead of, oh no, it's taking my job, is what if it takes everyone's job? What if we could allocate resources based on something entirely differently than the work that you put in? We're not in a scarce resource world. We have enough resources for literally everybody, right? They're just hoarded at different levels, and they're allowed to do that because of this work input requirement. But if we redistributed all the resources and then said, fine, everybody is going to get resources based on something else, think about what you would do with your life if you didn't have to worry about income coming in. What would you do with it? And I think that this idea that people would do nothing is completely false. We've seen so many different examples of people like who have mental illness when they have no purpose, right? There are people who, like the people in South Korea, who wandered the streets after the Asian financial crisis because they had nowhere to go. They would dress up and just walk around because they had nowhere to go. People need purpose. We can still find purpose. Purpose doesn't depend on work. Purpose is internal, right? So we could completely accelerate being a multiplanetary species. We could protect the oceans. We could do more to save animals, right? We would be kinder to each other. Think of how much crime is based entirely. So if we didn't have resource scarcity, think of like how many other people would be able to contribute in a completely different way. Like, I think that humanity would actually finally reach a different phase where we would no longer be living in survival mode, which is literally what we've been living in, this entire time. We just have currency as the medium instead of, like, all of us having to chase, a bear to get food, but we're still in that same survival mode. This can actually push us out of that into something else, but it takes basically everyone agreeing we need a completely new global economic model.